My name is Dr. Lightborn or Lauren. I'm a preventive medicine resident at Mount Sinai. We're just giving a talk on introduction to pediatric vaccines. We'll talk about what a vaccine is, how childhood vaccination rates are dropping, some history of vaccines, and why there might be some vaccine mistrust and confusion, and then a general vaccine schedule for children. What is a vaccine? It's a simple, safe, effective way to protect you, your loved ones against harmful diseases. It uses the body's natural defenses to build resistance to specific infections that can be against viruses most times and also bacteria. And so essentially the vaccine trains your immune system to create something called antibodies, just as it does when you're exposed to a regular disease. What's different about the vaccine is that the vaccine introduces a killed or weakened form of the germ or bacteria or virus so that you're not able to transmit it to others, and it doesn't put you at risk of developing the disease or its complications. In the body, we might experience a pathogen. Here's a measles example, or chickenpox, or the flu, or something new. When we are vaccinated, our body creates these antibodies against the matching pathogen. And so then we will end up having this antibody floating around in our bloodstream. So then if we get introduced again to measles, we would have this antibody that prevents us from getting it. When we have a new pathogen that there is no antibody for, we end up getting the disease and are able to spread it to others. So the antibodies are important because they will surround the virus here. And here we see on the A side, there's no antibodies, so they're not surrounding the virus. The virus is able to link onto a human cell and cause infection. And then it would go on to replicate further and further, getting you sick and then also getting others sick. But here with the antibodies, it surrounds the virus particle and then another cell comes and eats it. So it prevents it from getting inside of your cells, preventing us from essentially getting sick. And the New York Times has come out and there's been a lot of research that since around 2020, we're seeing a drop actually in the rates of vaccination, especially amongst children. And this is a chart showing US kindergartners in the United States. The metric at the federal level is 95%. We see that measles dropped precipitously, polio, and whooping cough. We want to talk about getting it back up and increasing it and understanding what's been going on. So the drop started during the pandemic and continued to drop afterwards. This is alarming because we do need something called herd immunity. It aids in the disease elimination and reduces disease burden for the overall health structure system, the costs in healthcare or just costs for you being sick, taking off time from work. And then also it protects people who are too immunocompromised to get vaccinated. What is herd immunity? So we have the vaccinated person is in blue and then the infected person is in orange. If only a few people are vaccinated and boop, someone gets infected, then a lot of people can end up spreading the disease really fast. If a lot of people are vaccinated, then when the disease comes to the area, it's unable to spread as far. That's the idea of herd immunity. Specifically for childhood vaccinations, there's been a lot of talk about measles because measles was pretty much unseen until the vaccination rates fell. And the reason why that's important is because in order for the community to have herd immunity, you need a 92% inoculation rate. So we are at around 93. We've fallen from 95 to 93. That's something that's really important. There are also programs through the government that allow for people to get access to vaccines, even if they are not able to pay, if their guardians or parents are not able to afford them. That's the Vaccines for Children program. It's one of the most important contributors to health equity and allows children to stay on the vaccine schedule. And then also, I would say that as of right now, funding comes through Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. It goes to CDC. The history of where vaccines kind of started in childhood. In 1000 CE, the Chinese used inoculation known as variolation. And that was essentially taking a pin, and if you had smallpox, they would prick that scab and then put it in somebody else's skin. So they were able to get a mild form of the disease, and it would work for immunity for that person. But it also spread things like hepatitis, syphilis, and then also it was now contagious to the next person. So not a very effective or efficient way to to do a vaccine. But moving on, the first vaccination, Edward Jenner used cowpox material to create immunity that stopped smallpox from spreading quickly. Then germ theory in 1879 is demonstrated by Louis Pasteur, the guy who pasteurized milk, and he produces the first lab-developed vaccine for chicken cholera. And in the 1940s, large-scale production of vaccines like diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccines paved the way for protecting millions of children. And then in 1955, we were able to eradicate polio. The polio vaccine is licensed and it has parents everywhere breathe a sigh of relief. Just a little tidbit, my grandfather, his brother had polio, and he told me that he used to carry his brother on his back in college because they didn't have elevators in the building that he went to school in. So polio is not too far removed from us. 1960s, active research and development. Researchers begin targeting measles, mumps, and rubella, significantly reducing the disease burden on kids. And then there's a couple more, talk by the smallpox, no more chickenpox, and then of course COVID-19. Origin of mistrust. Essentially, we know that there's some reasons why people might be mistrustful of the medical system, but then also there was one article that was written that ended up being extremely faulty. Andrew Wakefield was approached by a British organization who was going to sue and bring a class action lawsuit, and then he created this research based off of them coming to him, which is essentially a conflict of interest. And the Lancet in 1998, it was published, but it only had 12 children, which is an extremely low number and is not very statistically sound. And in 2004, this was retracted by the Lancet editors, and 10 people that were there who wrote with him said it should not have even been published. In 2010, they did retract the article, but unfortunately the damage was done, and lots of people are thinking that vaccines link to autism, but autism rates are similar in people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated. So even though we may be learning more about autism, this is not the link. This is not the reason. And just going into a typical pediatric vaccine schedule, this is what people will have from birth. We'll have different doses of different viruses here. We've got Hep B, rotavirus, RSV, diphtheria, tetanus. You'll see for rotavirus, you will have a first dose and a second dose. And then for Tdap, you have 1, 2, 3 doses, and then a fourth dose. So essentially what we've done is look to see how many times does the body need to see this pathogen before we're sure that when we see it again, we will not get sick. And so you want to have just enough of a dose that we boost the immunity, but not enough that you get sick. So we have multiple doses. Vaccines are safe and an effective public health tool to protect you and your community. And if you want to do something for your neighbor, get vaccinated. For COVID specifically, the new booster is available for everyone 6 months and older. And if unvaccinated, 2 doses for the Moderna or 3 doses for Pfizer. The 2024 flu shot is available and the flu is still going around. RSV, 1 shot, greater than 60 years old. And then if you have pneumonia and you're a high-risk patient, you should get 1 dose of the pneumococcal. And all adults greater than 65 should get 1 dose. And high-risk individuals, you're over 65, you're pregnant, have HIV, cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. Also, just touching briefly that people have and do develop long COVID, and we're still learning more about it even now, doing more research. Some people who have had long-term conditions or symptoms that may continue to develop even after the infection. The people who are at most risk are those that have hospitalized or that have prior underlying health conditions or did not receive the COVID vaccine. And some of the symptoms include coughing, breathing problems, loss of smell, body aches, brain fog, trouble sleeping, fatigue, and fever. Right now, there is no test for long COVID. So if you think you have long COVID, please talk to your health provider and you can scan the code listed below.